Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pixel Show. It's your lucky day because you know what we're going to do today? We're going to do my favorite segment called The Power of Simple. So, Power of Simple. This is one of my biggest things that I teach that I like to talk about. A lot of people, you talk about like how to use the camera, what lenses to use, whatever. I'm kind of teaching you what to see when you look through the camera. But the idea really, it's a simple techniques that make your images more powerful really by doing less. So what we talk about on the Power of Simple, these are all the different segments or spin-offs of the Power of Simple. It could be color. We could be talking about retouching, depth of field, rule of thirds, shapes, texture, you name it. But today is movement. We're going to talk about movement, or what other people in the photography industry like to call motion blur. So motion blur, by definition, is the apparent streaking of moving objects in a photograph or sequence of frames, such as film or animation. It results when the image being recorded changes during the recording of a single exposure due to rapid movement or long exposure, right? Motion blur. I like to call it movement. So let's jump in. So the first image, this was a wedding that I did in New Jersey. And, those of you that shoot weddings, you're always shooting pictures of the bride getting ready. So there was no different than this, except I just wanted to do it a little bit differently. So I was like, well, how can I make this shot a little bit more interesting? So I slowed my camera shutter down. You see the XF data at the bottom to a 15th of a second. I was about 3.2 at 125th of a second. And I'm shooting with the Sony A-mount 85 1.8 because the G Master hadn't come out yet. And I really like the 85. And I handheld it. So I wanted to make sure that I manually focused a lot. So chances are I was focused here manually. I think I was. And I focused on her eye and then just squeeze the trigger on the camera softly so that I got a little bit of movement. And of course, the beauty thing about digital in today's world is that you can look at the back of your camera and see if it worked. I shot about 2 or 3 images. I got this image and I moved on. But it just adds a little bit more interest to an image that otherwise is generally not always exciting. Now here's an old image of mine. This is so old that it's film. So I started shooting digital, I would say probably in about 2003. So it was sometime before that. And this kind of hotel had this like old world feel to it. And I think there were actually rumors. I think why we did this, the bride said that there was like rumors of it being haunted or whatever. So I was like, well, let's kind of create an image that looks like this. So basically, what I had her do, the same thing. I had her start at the bottom of the stairs. Oops, jumped ahead there. Had her start at the bottom of the stairs and then just run up the stairs. Now, because it was film, I don't necessarily remember what it was, but it was probably, again, about a 15th of a second. And with film, of course, I couldn't look to see if this was right. So I think we did it a couple times. Now, this next image, same bride, I believe. But we did it with flash. So this was an available light. So let's jump to this next image. I zoomed it in a little bit so you can see. So it's kind of creepy and spooky, right? And you can see through her. But the way this works, again, with flash is you do kind of a long exposure. Now, again, with digital, you can see your results. With film, I couldn't see it, but you just kind of guess at it. So maybe this was an 1/8 of a second, a 1/10 of a second, a 1/2 of a second. I don't remember. But you have her, you have her spin and you pop the flash. So as she would come around and look at the camera, I would pop the flash, or I started there, but then I had her spin. So you get kind of this effect. So this is fun to try. You have your flash out and you want to try this, experiment. Now here's also with flash, but this is in a studio in a little bit more of a controlled environment. This boy was the son of one of my clients, just a really great kid. His name was Spencer Proffer. And I don't know, I just liked him. We did some other shoots and he wanted to come in the studio and do some shoots with his guitar. So we were just playing around. And so again, here, the way I did this, let me explain it to you. is it's a double pop on the flash. So I had lights set up within my studio, and it was about a 5-second exposure. So you'd push the shutter, the flash would pop, and then I had 5 seconds till the end of the exposure, but I needed 5 seconds to allow to get that second exposure of him screaming. So we talked about, I said, I want the first image of you, solemn and you're playing guitar. And then as soon as I take that picture and you hear the flash pop, I want you to turn and change that expression and just belt it out and sing like, wah! And then I manually had to pop the second flash. So I would just reach out on my strobe controller or my camera and pop the flash for the second time. And so we did a few of these to get it right. But this is how it did. I don't actually remember what I shot it with. So it's a 5-second exposure at f16 at 100 ISO. So that's how I did it, a double pop on the strobe. Now here's an engagement shoot that I did in Seattle. And, love the background, love the scenery, but just to add a little bit more extra element, you want to add the movement of the traffic going by because it just helps illustrate, it helps tell a story more with the traffic going by. So this was shot with my Sony A9 with a 35-1.4. My shutter speed is 1/6 of a second at 3.2, about 400 ISO. And you just want to make sure with cars or things like that, like sometimes a 1/15 of a second is enough, but just long enough to get a blur. And of course, again, with digital, you can do a few experiments. You can see right away what's looking good as far as the movement goes, and then move on. Now, this picture that I titled Not Our First Date was shot in Los Angeles. And I call it that because this is actually their 1-year portrait shoot. This girl actually used to work for me. Her name is Annalisa, and she's since to go on and become a very successful photographer in San Diego. She wanted me to shoot her wedding and I couldn't do it. So a year later, they had me shoot a portrait of them. And the goal was to go downtown. And I knew the side of this building that I wanted to shoot on, and I wanted to shoot movement and hopefully catch a cab or something like that, some color. And I had the camera set up on a tripod. As you can see, the XF, so the shutter speed was about 1/10 of a second at almost f8, 7.1 at 50 ISO. This was with a Sony A-mount camera, the A99, because I probably shot this prior to E-mount coming out. And had my A-mount 24-70 2.8. Now, the one thing I love about this is this was the very last exposure we shot, maybe for 10, 15 minutes. And I was like, I just want one more. And I waited, and the patience paid off because I got this really interesting blue/yellow cab. But I like it because the complementary colors of the blue kind of matches the wall, but then with the yellow, there's enough separation to help you see the movement in the image. So this is probably one of my favorite movement images I shot. And this is probably the second one. Now, this was a wedding that I did many New Years ago. This was at the Pierre Hotel in New York City. And here, the way this worked was that I was actually in the room doing room shots. So I was set up on a tripod, shooting the room setup before the guests and everybody came into the room. And then at the far end, I'm going to show you, let's use the laser here. Laser, boom. Where's my laser? There it is. So there was a door right here. And the bride and groom walked in this door, and they came down and walked down the dance floor. And of course, I had to pause to stop my room shots. But when he got to the end, their names were John and Allison. I said, hey, John, give Allison a spin, knowing that I was at a very long exposure. I was at 1.5 seconds at f8. And again, to get that like f8, you see kind of the stars and all the candles. And when you're at a nice small aperture like that, you get that. And I kind of wanted that effect. So that's kind of why I was all the way up at f8. And again, this was a film shot. And so I kind of remember this. That's why I kind of I knew I was about 1.5 seconds at some of the exposures. But anyway, he spun her. And I got one shot at it. This is what I got. And ended up, this was one of their favorite images from the wedding. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they have a 30 by 40 or a 40 by 60 of this hanging in their home. So you could call it a happy accident, but having the wherewithal to say, hey, spinner, because I know it's going to make some cool blurry movement, but they absolutely loved it. So that's what you can do. That's movement. This little recap of the images that I showed you today. Add it to your workflow. When there's something in your frame or something in your environment that's moving, it really helps if you have a tripod. Sometimes you can do it handheld, but try it. It really kind of adds that little extra element into something that normally would be pretty, but then you add kind of another element of interest. So thanks again for listening. I'm Robert Evans. Thank you very much for watching, and look for another episode right in the future.